It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Cristina Baker, and we're going to be discussing her brand new book, Hope in 60 Seconds, Encountering the God of the Impossible. Cristina, it's truly a pleasure to speak with you again. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Shaun. It's great to be here with you this morning.
Well, and it is kind of fun. You and I got to hang out last week in Charlotte when you were taping with Sid Roth for all their various shows. And I don't always get to meet people in person. So it's fun to actually have you on the podcast after we got to hang out and have an experience together. It's always a little weird getting into these conversations where somebody's book is more autobiographical or memoirish, where it's like, I desperately want to go back to the origin story question that my audience is used to. But that's kind of the whole point of this conversation. So we're going to skip that. And I'd love to get into just kind of a little bit of your writing journey, because your journey to getting published is a little bit out of the box. And so take this into why you ended up on TikTok, how that kind of took on a life of its own and had a lot of momentum. And how does that get you into publishing a book? It was a fun journey to hear you share last week.
Yeah. So right before the pandemic started, the Lord gave me a dream. And in the dream, I saw basically the Lord was just showing me the darkness over social media. And I had never been a social media person. I mean, I would get on social media every now and then. And so it took me, I processed it with my husband, and it took me a little bit. And I was like, okay, let's go ahead and do this. And he had shown me a few things in the dream that I knew. It was like, okay, I'm going to hop on TikTok. I know this is a social media app for the kids, and there's dancing and singing and all this. I'm like, I'm definitely not going to do that. But okay, I'll just hop on and do a prayer. And so I prayed a prayer in Spanish. That's my first language. And so I prayed a prayer in Spanish. And the next morning I woke up and the video had gone viral. And, videos go viral all the time. So I thought, maybe this is just a one-off, but I continued posting. And obviously the pandemic started, and they continued going viral one after the other. And my husband and I just kind of looked at each other. We were like, there's a need here that just the fact that somebody would be willing to receive a prayer through a screen was just crazy to us, Shaun. We were just a little bit shocked people would be willing to do that. And so one after the other, we're posting prayers in English and in Spanish. And people began reaching out to me and asking me what was the story behind the prayers. And people started asking, is there we can read a little bit more about the story? I was sharing just 1-minute clips about, going to jail, going through a brain tumor, and just different parts of my story I felt like could speak to people and give them hope during that time. And I knew in my heart for many years, like, okay, maybe one day I'll write a book about this crazy story. And so that's when I decided, okay, this is time. I think it's time to write a book.
You have a friend who connects you with some publishing leadership at HarperCollins. They end up being really excited about you. You try to run away from it for a while. God puts a person in your path to be like, hey, I also work for HarperCollins. And so you end up getting a book deal. But I think where I'd like to go next is just hear, what was the process like for you with writing? Because one couple of challenges when it's your first book, you don't know what you're doing. So you want to put everything in the kitchen sink in it. So many people almost lean into trying to write an identity message, because it's often the story. That first book is how you got saved, how God transformed your life. But the other challenge with that is you're reliving everything. And it can be it's cathartic, but it's also painful to put that stuff on a page, and then also wrestle with sharing it with the world. So just kind of the writing process. What were the challenges? What were like the God actually using it to heal you moments? I imagine it was kind of a roller coaster.
It absolutely was. And, when you become a Christian and you've got a testimony, everybody, well, you got to write a book. And so it's just the next thing to do. But I really believe that God doesn't give us the full picture when we step into it, Shaun. We get like this little glimpse, because if I had known what I was going to go through, excuse me, Shaun, if I had known what I was going to go through during the journey of the writing process, I would have said no from the beginning. And I actually had somebody tell me, they were like, "Hey, Cristina, it's going to be really cathartic. Things are going to start rising to the surface." And I was like, well, no, I was like, I've preached this before, and, just gave all the reasons why I would be okay. And not too far into the process, probably a couple of chapters in, I was just, I mean, the Lord really started to deal with just things that I had walked through at certain seasons of my life. That when I was in those seasons, I was just busy trying to survive it. And so here I am now, all the, 13 years later, and the Lord is just kind of starting to put his finger on certain things, part of the story. And writing a book is really messy. It exposes everything in your heart, just gets put on the table. And, looking back on it, I'm so thankful that I walked through the process with the Lord. But looking back on it, it's like, wow, if the Lord had shown it to me what I was going to walk through, I would have absolutely said no. And so I think that sometimes the Lord does that. He doesn't show us the process of what we're going to go through, because if he did, we would never walk through the tough stuff.
And I'd mentioned this to you briefly when we spoke last week. I see one of the big challenges to wrestle with as a first-time author, putting yourself out there, is you end up becoming the poster boy or poster girl for this message that God has given you to steward. You don't always realize that at the time, but you're going to be called to live this message out, because, writing a book opens doors. It gets you on TV shows and podcasts and puts you on stages you may not have been on before. And especially with such a gripping journey that we get to go on with you in the book, I feel like people are going to intensely feel like they know you. They're going to relate to you. Have you had to wrestle with that at all, or is that still something you're stepping into? Because it's a real thing. People have a strong expectation that who you say you are in the book is how you live your life.
Yeah. And it was really powerful when you shared that with me last week. I was like, wow, I don't know if I could better explain writing a book. It's not, maybe it's like first, second, third book, just how you explain how you have to live from that place. It's like you walk in that, if you're writing a book on hope or a book on identity or a book on, how you overcame trauma, a lot of the times what's going on while you're writing the book is you're having to step up to the plate. And there's a lot of things going on around you that are challenging your hope, that is challenging, your faith in certain areas of the very thing that you're writing about. And so, walking through, I actually had the man that led me to the Lord. His name is Hilroy. As I was writing the book, he said to me, "Well, Cristina, how do you expect to write a book on hope?" And the very thing, that was the very thing I was like, wow, I just need hope right now as I'm writing the book, and he's like, God wants to take you through the very thing just to make sure, it's like all of those areas that you're writing about, he's going to show you that you actually, you do have authority in these places. It's almost like he takes you through another dry run of all of the things, that you went through in the past, or the things that you're writing about. It was really, really deep. Even when you shared that, Shaun, I was like, wow, that is so powerful. I don't know. No, if somebody had said that to me at the beginning, I would have probably understood, okay, this is what's going on here.
Yeah, it is an intense process where, God takes you back to those dark and lonely places, those painful places. And those are often the places where the enemy came to steal and destroy and wreak havoc in our lives. And I feel like, on the one hand, you're on the other side of this in so many ways, and that's why you were writing the book. But at the same time, I feel like as we get to relive and process and figure out how do I package this up in a way that, because there's that balance of not giving the darkness too much of a press run in what you share. Because you hear some people share their testimonies, like it sounds like you still want to be a drug dealer and a thug, or like people glory in the darkness. It's weird. And it is a real balance to be like, yes, there was a lot of darkness, but the reason I'm here sharing this with you is Christ is that much bigger and brighter, and that's what changed my journey. That's what changed my story. And I'm like, I want to meet authors and interview authors where, I love when people like, sometimes I refer back to my own book when I need hope and encouragement, and they partnered with God to write a book. If the book really makes a difference in your own life, then that I feel like that says to your audience, hey, that can make a difference for me too. And so I always like to pull back the curtain of the writing journey when I can in these conversations, because it's, a lot of times you see a book on a shelf and you're like, oh wow, they had a contract, they wrote a book, and it's out there, and I get to buy it, and it's awesome and it's great. But there's so much spiritual transformation, and just God grows us in the journey. It's a stretching process, and there's more healing and more depth and growth. There's so much that comes out of it along the way. So thanks for running the gauntlet. I know it was a journey.
Yeah. And if I can add one thing, Shaun, is the same lady told me, she said, there's another layer of healing available when you begin to write. And so, yeah, you're like, yeah, you think you're delivered, and you are delivered, but there's this other layer that God pulls back that happens only when we write, I believe. And there's such a power that's released. There's an anointing, there's a grace that God gives, but there's just this other layer that is deeper, that is just takes us into the heart of God in a deeper way that I feel like I wouldn't have experienced any other way. That's why I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful He gave me the grace to say yes.
Yeah, like so many of the things that God calls us to do, it's a faith leap where it's like, okay, welcome, Shaun. Welcome, Christina. Here's the cliff. We're going to step off. There's actually a path there. You can't see it, but with me, we're going to get the other side. And it's. I feel like it's as we learn to take those leaps of faith where we're like, God, this doesn't make any sense. This is impossible. But I know this is where you're calling me to go right now. And so we take that step in faith. And I feel like it's a way that God gets us ready for the things that He wants to open up that are further down the path. But it literally takes being like, I'm going to give you complete trust in this situation. And once we do that once, twice, 5 times, 10 times, just on the journey, God knows He can trust us with more. And so more
Wow.
things will open up. But then it's not such a challenge next time. We're like, oh, well, God showed up before. We didn't fall off the cliff. God did cool things. And that can look like different things. Sometimes it's writing a book. Sometimes God tells you to move somewhere, pick something. But we all have those moments where we're like, okay, I know this is God, and it's really scary. And my friends and family they think I'm crazy. This doesn't make any sense. And yet, when we take those leaps, it's often a massive leap forward in a way that maybe has nothing to do with what God's asking you to do. It's the next step in the journey to get you to where He has you going. But
Powerful, Shaun.
I digress. We got to get into more of your story.
Okay.
You have so many milestones that I want to hit on, but we need like a 5-hour interview to cover all the cool parts of your journey. I can say when I saw you ministering in Charlotte last week, so they taped 3 shows, then there was a mentoring time, and then they set all the guests on the audience to start doing ministry. And so all of a sudden you bust out Spanish and just go to town ministering to this pastor and his wife. And I know I'd heard about Bolivia at some point in your book trailer or with what I read about you before I met you, but talk to us about the divine setup of God having you in Bolivia. Because you would, if you'd been on a lineup of ministry people, I wouldn't have said that girl right there, she's powerful in Spanish ministry. I wouldn't have picked that at all.
No
So
way.
what, as you share in the book, there are a lot of challenges there, but what is that unto on this side of the journey?
Having been in Bolivia for so many years, I saw the court. Now, I wasn't a believer when I was living in South America, but I had the opportunity to go back a few years ago, and people in South America, Latin people, that very tribal people, when they go after God, it is big, it's explosive, it's passionate. And what I'm seeing, not just in the Latin American community in South America or in Central America, but also here, is there's an explosion happening here as there is over there. God is using the heartbeat in the Latin American people to release the passion and the love of God. And actually that pastor and his wife, they had such an amazing story, but they're their heart of being here in the States was simply that, to release the passion and the love of God here. Um, I believe as you know, as the days go on, we're going to see more and more Latin American ministers in this nation, because I don't know what the ratio is, but there's just so many people, so many Hispanic people in this country. But, Shaun, you're seeing kind of, and I know you know this, but you're seeing kind of all of the cultures coming together right now in this nation. It's not just Latin America, but it's just, Asians and, African American. You've just got all of the cultures that God is bringing together in this nation. For me, that was a reminder when we were at Sidroth. It was like, wow, God is just, there's an explosion happening in culture, and he's bringing the body of Christ together. That is just, it's just like this atomic bomb going off in the spirit of the body coming together.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to many leaders the past couple of years where people are often overthinking. Oh, I want to go be a missionary. I want to go minister to the world. And it's like, man, the world's outside your doorstep.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're here.
no matter what state you're in here in the U.S., there are people from all parts of the globe. I mean, if you actually, really start paying attention to your community, it's crazy the folks you will meet. Yeah, God's bringing them all to us, so to speak. And also, it's fascinating to see the missionaries that God is planting here. I've got friends from Australia, friends from Asian countries, like places often that kind of the missionary movement of like the 50s and 60s poured into all these other countries. And now God is giving us a return on what we sowed into those places, sending missionaries here to the States when we're walking through a dark time. And ironically, for as, historically being known as a Christian nation, and just think of the number of churches and believers here in the States, yet there's such a need. God is sending us missionaries now, which is, I love that there's a return on what many of those folks have gone home to be with the Lord at this point. What they brought other places, now God is giving a return and bringing that back to us here. It's a very sobering thought to think that culturally we've reached such a scary place that God is sending missionaries so we can be reached for Jesus.
Wow. I've never thought about it that way, Shaun. It's really, wow. That's powerful.
We're going places we never thought we'd end up. Who knew this would be such a great conversation today? I think the place I'd love to go next is just give us a kind of a snapshot into kind of your world. When you leave Bolivia, you end up going to Hawaii, and your dad's there. And I think that's going to be a real startling part of your story for people to read in the book, where I think they're going to relate to where you were in your life at the time in so many ways. But to go from one situation to an even almost stranger situation to some degree, that had to be a real shock for you.
It was. And I think a lot of people have asked, when you hear something like that, my mom married somebody he was very well to do. And, we lived in a very large home with maids and all the things that, money can provide. But we lived in a prison. My mom wasn't allowed to go outside unless she had permission from my stepdad. And so you hear that. Sometimes people hear that. They're like, oh, but so showing up to Hawaii, I had never experienced lack materially. Yet at the same time, there was some relief that I had gotten out of that situation. So I show up. The last time I had seen my dad was 10 years ago. He was an oil exec at a big oil and gas company, had sold everything he had, received an inheritance from my grandmother after she died. So he moves to Maui, Hawaii, where that was the last time we knew that he was at. So they put me on a one-way ticket there. I show up, and he shows up to the airport 6 hours later, and we both recognize each other. But at this point I was, I had black eyes. We're all black. I was in the goth scene, and, we get in his car, and he's like, there's something I need to tell you. And he said, this is crazy. Your mom sent you here. And he says, I'm living in a tent on the beach. I'm homeless. And so it was like a curtain had been ripped open for me as a 15-year-old girl. It's like, does that mean I'm homeless too? I mean, what does this mean for me? So the shock and the, it was just something, it was quite traumatic at that age, Shaun, because I mean, I didn't know, just the fear that took over. I was already living in a lot of fear up until that point in my life, but this was now a different kind of fear. Like, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to sleep? What if something happens to me? And so it was like the world was really opened up to me at that moment of my life.
And how do we get from there to you ending up in Texas? Like how long were you in Hawaii? And then give us the circumstances of how God pulls you out of that place and plops you back in the mainland of the US.
Yeah, the mainland, that's what they call it too. 9 months. We were going to the aquatic center to take showers. My dad was mowing lawns to be able to feed me. And one of my aunts had gotten news. I was going to what used to be internet cafes, and I would go to an internet cafe and send emails, just trying to see if somebody would respond. I was, letting them know that I was living homeless. There was a payphone at the beach. And so I had tried calling, leaving messages. So I had my dad's sister had caught wind about what was happening. So she bought me a ticket from Maui to Houston, where all of my family was. But my stay in different homes and my family's homes, they didn't want to deal with a goth teenager that was on drugs and clearly just a problem. So then they put me on a one-way ticket to Pennsylvania, where my brother was going to school. He had just started college there at a place called Messiah College. And so I was living in a Red Roof Inn at the time. And my brother was kind of freaking out. I don't know what to do with my sister. And so he goes to the basketball coach of the college he was attending, who was a believer. And he goes to the staff meeting of this church that he attended, and a couple stands up. Their names are Mr. and Mrs. Hess. And they stood up during the staff meeting and they said, "We'll take her." And so that family took me in for about 3 years after I had graduated. I graduated from high school, and then.
Well, and for that part of your story, I think with what you share about how the Hesses loved you, they had some basic rules for you to follow. One of the rules was you had to go to church, and they brought you to church regardless of how you dressed or how you looked. And yet that was a stopping point on your journey that gave you stability. Yet move forward, there's all kinds of challenges that you have to face, things you have to go through after that. And so I just think that's such a beautiful reminder where we don't always see the fruit of what we're sowing into in a season, where God will bring us somebody to care for and love and meet needs for. And that's not necessarily the end of the story. In fact, there could be more heartache and destruction that comes after that. And, the real breakthrough comes in the other side of that. But without that season of you having just a stable place, there was nowhere else for you to go. And so I just love that they were able to pour into you, and, maybe they could really see what God had for you further down the path. You had just finished walking out quite a few more things before you'd get to that part of your journey. Man, there's so much I want to cover, but we're going to keep bouncing around. If you want to get the full story, like you got to get the book. I mean, I felt the Spirit as I was reading parts of it. Like was getting like the Holy Spirit tingles, as you might call them. I'm almost crying at some points, and really as a father and a husband, and as a son who's walked through difficult family situations, I saw so many of the hurts and pains that I've walked through in different parts of the story. And so, yes, it's going to pull on your heartstrings, but at the same time, my hope is it's going to challenge you to be like, you know what? I could step up and show up for somebody, or God might be calling you out of a comfort zone or out of a box, so to speak, that sometimes ministry looks nothing like being in a prayer line at the front of a church. I feel like right now we're in a season where God is sending us completely outside of the four walls of the church for ministry. And we really have to get to a place where we have a comfort level of that ministry doesn't look like what it was in the 90s and into the early 2000s. We're just in a different season. The needs are different. People aren't necessarily willing to even darken the door of a church. So how we bring the gospel to people and love people and show up, it's going to look different. And that's okay. We need to really embrace that and just realize we're living in different times, and we're serving and loving in a culture that has different societal needs, different challenges that maybe we faced when we were coming up in the church. Talk to us a little bit about uh, prayer meetings and your coworkers ministering to you. What did that look like? Because your life was still a mess. You have a job. Your coworkers. You'd mentioned your friend who led you to the Lord. Uh, what was that like to have these people pouring into you? Maybe at a time when you weren't necessarily ready to receive it, or were you uncomfortable with those folks early on? Take us into that part of your story.
Yeah. Well, I gave my life. I would have never gone into a church, Shaun, never. I just always felt like I couldn't add up to the requirements, across going into a church at the time. And they were having these covert undercover prayer meetings every day at noon at a secular university. I had just gone to jail and I was out on bail. Man comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder and says, "I have a word from the Lord for you. We have prayer meetings every day at noon. I want to invite you out today." And before I walked there, I remember I was scared. I got off of the elevator and I could hear them praying. It was like music just down the hall. And I went in, my hand was shaking when I crossed the threshold of that door. I walked in and I remember having this thought, Shaun, because I had never seen people pray like this before. I had this thought: if there is a God, these people have come face to face with him. I'd never seen anything like it. And long story short, I give my life to the Lord that day. They're all laying hands on me. They're praying in tongues, which I'd never heard before. That scared me a little bit. But I knew, I could feel, this is truth. This is God. I knew it in my spirit. And so those group of intercessors began to pour into my life every day at noon. Boy, I did not miss we called it PT, prayer time. I never missed prayer time. And it was like deliverance. It was, full on demons getting cast out. People were just coming from the office, showing up to these prayer meetings. And it was a whole bunch of us. A lot of people started coming that, again, would never go to church, but it was just so raw and real. The love that they had. It was like their mission was to see me walk free and be healed. That was their mission. And I had never received that from anybody before. I'd never experienced that where they saw me valuable enough to fight for. They were fighting for me every single day, unlike anything I had ever seen or experienced in my entire life. The passion, the fervor, and the love that they had for God changed my life. I was guarded at first, but little by little, the Spirit of God in that place was so strong every day, Shaun, that it was like my heart began to melt. Now, even I had given my life to the Lord, but their prayers and the desire that they had to see God show up in my life melted me. It changed my life. And those people are, sometimes you have to watch other people love something to learn how to love it yourself. That's what I learned in that season. And watching them love God taught me and showed me, wow, this is what it looks like to love him. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of times we often see what we want in others, and we don't quite we see the fruit of something, or like we don't always understand the journey it took for that person to get there. But I feel like the Father in His grace gives us glimpses of like, I so need that. I don't know what it's going to take to get there, but I'll sell it all and buy the field if that's what it takes, because I just want that, because and it's without those. Again, it's the power of the testimony. Even if we see the countenance somebody walks in, and just the joy and the peace when that is completely vacant in our life, we know that we need that. I mean, we long for it, and I feel like that's what makes it so attractive. Like sometimes we just see people living life and being normal. We're like, I don't know how I get there, but God, let's figure this out, because I know that's what I need. I think the place I'd love to go as we kind of move towards finding a place to land the conversation. There's one part that you share in the book that was almost had me crying. It's kind of in my notes I wrote, this is when she's with Ryan, it's the worst best date ever kind of a thing.
That's and so good.
And then like to kind of take this into just the season when you're walking through a health crisis, like that, just that whole season, like God is overtime working redemption and restoration in your life with this man that you're starting to date. So take us into that part of your story. It's just a beautiful story of redemption. I love it.
Yeah. I've said this a lot, Shaun. God has spent the last, since I gave my life to the Lord, righting my wrongs. And what I mean by righting is not writing, but RIGHTING. And it wasn't in the way that maybe like, I didn't get the family, the whole family, that maybe the parents that stayed together or the different things that happened. It didn't come that way, but it came in a different way. And that's what the Lord does. He will bring the things that we didn't have through another way. He will fill those voids in our hearts and in our lives. And when I got diagnosed with a brain tumor, it was just that question. I had this question of, like everybody, is like, God, why me? I'm 20. I was just in my early 20s, and the man that led me to the Lord, Hilroy, said to me, Cristina, sometimes it's not about you, it's about what God is doing around you. And so he gave me the scripture of when the disciples asked Jesus, they said, well, who here has sinned? And he said, well, it's not it's not him. This is unto the glory of God. So it's not a sin issue. It's unto God's glory. And so Ryan was who God appointed to demonstrate the Father's love that I had never experienced in my entire life. And before we even took our vows at the altar, he made a commitment to me in sickness and in health. And so actually Ryan proposed right after they diagnosed me with the brain tumor. He proposed, and he knew how much I wanted to be married. I always tell him, I'm like, you proposed because you just think something was going to happen. He said, no, I knew you wanted to be married. And that man fed me through a straw and was just my rock during that time. Well, they removed a 4-inch, the base of the tumor was 4 inches when it was removed. And the biopsy revealed I was cancer-free and I was tumor-free. And it was through that brain surgery, Shaun, that my mom and my dad gave their lives to the Lord. Right before we went up to the operating room, we didn't even know he was going to be there. My dad was waiting for us at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And he said that he was just sitting in his room by himself the night before. And he said, he was an atheist. And he said, if you bring my daughter through this, I'll serve you. And so he just had to make it to the cancer center before I went into the operation to let me know he had given his life to Jesus. And so that was like a gift from the Lord. So I come out of that surgery, successful surgery and everything. And then 10 days later, my mom is taking care of me. And by herself in her room, while we were at her house, she gives her life to Jesus. And they both did not know that they had both done this on their own. And so God used that season of my life. Not only was he revealing himself to me as healer, but he was revealing himself as redeemer in my family. And my dad being an atheist, my mom, non-practicing Catholic, had never had a relationship with Jesus. God used that place of it, where, I say adversity, but a place where it was like, God, am I going to live through this? And God used that. God doesn't bring that on us, but really it's Romans 8:28. He makes all things work together for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. And, I always encourage people when they're going through hard things where we always want to make sense of things. But I always say that there isn't a dark moment, a dark valley that God will not use. We just never know how he's going to use it, but he will use it.
Yeah, often those dark seasons or seasons that are memorable for one reason or another, it's in hindsight where it makes sense. Like in the eye of the storm, you're not sure, but as you look back, as you see, I like to think of it as that divine thread God has sewn into the journey. It's like, oh, you've actually been there the whole way. I couldn't see it at the time. And so things are often and not purposeful in the sense that I'm saying God causes things, but God
Right.
doesn't waste anything.
That's
And there's so much intentionality with the journey that God has us on, and how He works it for good, how He molds it and shapes it. And even the hardships and the difficulties we all walk through. We've all got junk. We all got stuff we wish could have gone better or worked out differently. Yet it's those same places that God redeems us and restores us and gives us authority in the Spirit to release things in other people's lives. People who need that exact same healing or breakthrough that we had, God will bring us people that need minister in that exact area. And because we are overcomers, because we're restored and redeemed, the level of authority we carry to minister to those things, I think it's often bigger than we realize. And so
yeah.
God doesn't waste anything along the journey. Goodness, where to land? We got to find a place to
We
wrap up.
gotta find it, Shaun.
I think second to last question. So in terms of like, you know, having a ministry, like how does that show up? What does that look like? Because I feel like we get in seasons where we'll be doing things, and I was like, oh, now you got a TikTok following, and now you have a book. So in terms of Cristina Baker and ministry, what does that even mean in this? Like, what did that mean 2 years ago, and what does that mean in the season ahead? I'm guessing God is ramping things up and opening doors in a way that only comes through the things that He's been having you walk through.
Yeah. Shaun, my husband and I were talking about this the other day. What it looked like 2 years ago is what it is today. And it's the one for us. That's our heartbeat. TikTok began with, God, my heart. God, would you put this prayer into the screen that needs hope the most? And my husband and I pray for every video that gets put out. We never put something out unless him and I come into agreement for that thing, for that one thing. God, I pray that you would touch the heart that is hopeless. And it still looks like that today. He's a masses God, but He sees the one. And that's one thing, Shaun, I know you can relate to this too, is that, it's just the mystery of God, of how He sees the masses and He sees every single person, but then He sees the one. He's got this like tunnel vision on the one. And so that is still what it looks like today for us. The assignment is still TikTok. I feel like that's like the one thing that the Lord has put in front of us to be faithful with, is continuing to put the videos out. What's so crazy is you put one video out, Shaun, and it just, the reach. I just think it's so incredible how God can do that. It's just like the reach. Before you'd have to fly all over the world to go and reach all of these people. And there have been a lot of, God is, like you said, there's through the book and just different things have been opening up. Our heart is, we're so excited, and our hearts are just, my heart is very passionate and on fire for releasing hope. And, it's still the one. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's our passion. That's our heart. Yeah.
That was a perfect answer. There's almost no wrong answer to the question. I'm excited to see what the Holy Spirit brings out as we have these conversations. And in terms of what you said about still approaching it the same way that you did when you started, praying into every time you're about to release a prayer, and that you want to be in agreement. Just don't miss that, folks, because we can get into a place where we start to have a level of success in ministry and notoriety, and people put people get excited about, when they see you and you make a difference in their lives. But at the same time, don't lose those first things, those things that, kind of that core meaning of why are we doing this? And what is this unto? What is this for? What is God calling us to? Because you can get down the road where all of a sudden you're like, what are we doing? Like you can lose your way very quickly, just getting caught up in the success that comes with having a book, having a podcast or a TV show, all those things. And oftentimes people will get ways down the path, and they'll correct course and go back to where they started, in the sense of, oh, this really needs to be about the one being Jesus, but also Jesus helping to point you to those people, that he doesn't lose focus on the one that's out there in the crowd. And so I'm really glad you said that. That's a kind of a good reminder and a cautionary tale. Don't get lost from your calling. I think that's we talked about this a little bit before we got into the interview. That's one of the scariest things I've seen personally, as a guy who just works with leaders behind the scenes. Over the past 3-4 years, people have fallen into places of ministry that weren't their calling. We often all have those things where like, oh, I know this is what God designed me for. I'm on mission for, and we'll get pressure from other people or culture to step into things. While yes, we might be effective or we can make a difference in that space. But if it's not your assignment, there probably isn't going to be that same grace on when you're in your lane. So just, regardless of what's happening in the world, God might have you positioned in a specific place for a specific reason, for a certain need or a certain group of people. And don't lose sight of that. If God tells you to move, move. But if God doesn't tell you to move, stay at what he has you about. Because again, like we've implied, everything is very purposeful. So I love that that's where you landed us, is just staying, pressing in for, okay, let's make sure this is about why God has us on assignment and not what's going to, be clickbait or get more likes or shares, or all those sorts of things. Cristina, in terms of people connecting with you, your website, TikTok, all the things, how do we find out about you, your ministry, the book? Where do we go on the web?
Yeah, well, we're obviously TikTok for those. I know there's been a migration over to TikTok. It's been slow, but I'm on TikTok, also Instagram and Facebook, under my name, Cristina Baker. And of course, I have CristinaBaker.com.
Well, we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the show notes to Christina's website and social media, as well as links to places where you can pick up your very own copy of her new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Cristina Baker. Once again, our book today was Hope in 60 Seconds, Encountering the God of the Impossible. And Cristina, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Shaun. This has been great.